Can you hear me? Hello, everyone. Thanks for being with us. You have chosen a very good debate because if, like me, you have spent some time in the previous sessions, you have heard a lot of things regarding the company's role in the society. It's a very specific weekend. We're quite concerned. There's an elephant in the room this year, which is the political situation. And obviously, what I've been hearing since yesterday, there's a lot of reflection of the role of companies in society. Should we go further? That's not normally the role of companies to actually play an active role in the political realm, but something that they should go further in terms of participation to the debates of society, in terms of commitment for the society. There's also a deeper reflection in the midterm on the role of the companies, management of companies, and afterwards, after this period of uncertainties and instability, maybe there's a wake-up call. There's a strength of stability because it creates actually bonds. What we want to do with X is to build pathways and between worlds and universes, and maybe the aim is to overcome anger, conflicts, and combats. There's a new responsibility for companies nowadays. I will introduce the different panelists. We have a wonderful panel. I will start with Nathalie, which is on my far right. She's an economist from the Cercle des Économistes. She was in the University of Lille, and she will have the responsibility to set the scene for our debate in a few seconds. Next to her is Sophie CHASSAT. She's the president of Accuracy, which is an international firm of strategic advisory. She's also the author of a book called Élan Vital, and it's not without any link with our debate. It's regarding momentum and pulsions and everything that will actually trigger human beings, and we want to know more about it. Next to you, Céline BRUCKER from L'Oréal. She's been at L'Oréal since 2023. It's a L'Oréal France. You're right. Yeah. It's already good, you know. You've had a long career within L'Oréal. You've been to the US. You've seen different cultural sensibilities, and it's nice to see this in the light of different cultural background. It has been a forerunner in terms of commitment, in terms of gender parity, in terms of commitment for the protection of the environment. So it's good to hear the vision of L'Oréal, of its commitment towards the society. Next to you, Pierre FERRACCI, who's used to coming here. He's the chairman of the Alpha Group. Alpha is 900 people specialized in advisory and expertise in assisting companies, but also social partners, economic and socio-economic committees of companies. You have a very fine, sophisticated knowledge of the corporate world and the checks and balances within corporate world. You know that the company can represent a role model in this turmoil. Next to you, we have Stéphane DEDEYAN, who's the chairman of the board of La Banque Postale since 2003. And this is very interesting because we have a state-owned company with specific missions and roles, which is in its DNA, in its raison d'être. And we are curious to know what you have to say about the subject. NOΕL also, who's the general managing director of France Digital. That's a startup and investor in Europe. 2,000 members, and yourself, you've talked about gender equality and parity for quite some time. You've been part of the debate and the public debate, which we're going to talk about when we talk about liability of companies. Nathalie, the floor is yours to set the scene on the debate. You also have the opportunity and the right to speak up, to question our speakers, our guests. Seize this opportunity because it's not every day that you're going to have such a beautiful range of executive officers that will be accessible to you. It's also important for you as well. They need to listen to you, and during this period, you should actually ask the right questions. Thank you, Vincent. So we should see that our companies are undergoing important changes. We've talked about transition related to energy and protection of the environment, the digital revolution with the development of robots and AI, especially regenerative AI, the demographic shock with a longer life expectancy and simultaneously the drop in natality rate, the health crisis, the geopolitical crisis that have entailed a relocation of value chains and reindustrialization of the economy, and also institutional crisis, political crisis, such that we know them, that our country has known them today at the eve of a second round of elections, and the outcome of which remains uncertain, and that corresponds to a fragmentation of society. As we have said it earlier, these important U-turns entail important changes, both for employees but also for companies at large. How will trades be impacted? How should we adjust skills throughout the entire career path? How can we adapt to these transformations without leaving anyone outside along the way? Young people, the elderly, the minorities coming from vulnerable groups. What are the economic consequences, but also the consequences on society after the election? And in a more tangible way, uncertainties are reinforcing the concerns of employees, and they correspond to some of the expectations of on their part, which are social demands towards the companies, their quests for purpose at work, the necessity to adapt their skills via long life learning, the looking for better acknowledgement and better remuneration for their work, and the necessity to develop virtuous behaviors in the face of climate change and to have more social inclusion, the need for social democracy in the face of a democracy that is more and more fragmented. And what is quite interesting is that in this context, facing these radical uncertainties, the corporate world continues to be a place where people can speak to one another, where one spends most of one's time, and where there is stability, which is therefore an environment that is reassuring, which is a source of safety, especially in this context. French people trust companies as a majority. May they be small or large, may they be state-owned or private companies. And we have seen over the last week a lot of things that got out of control, however. But can companies respond to these social demands? How can we reconcile a common project with the expectations of each and every one of us? Which strategy should we implement to respond to that? Which governance, which management policy should we set up? How can we reconcile these demands while keeping efficient and making sure that we have enough profit and yield? And do they have an interest in doing so? What about working with social partners as a potential means to respond to these needs? Should we go towards a new governance model? And then, to quote Philippe Val's words this morning, is it the right time to go towards a new form of capitalism? Oh, well, some of these statements are quite daunting. So you've published an article in L'Echo. We'll start with you because of the tone of this as well. If I'm not mistaken, your column says that facing the shock of dissolution with the possibility of having an extreme party afterwards, you think that the companies have a role to play, that they should go further. We could wonder, are we not asking too much from companies? And you say, well, basically, we need to reinforce models of common interest. I wonder what you mean by models of common interest. Something that weaves bonds between people, because the corporate world is capable of creating that. Can you explain that? Yes, it's actually quite ironical if you think about that, because we are the exact opposite. It's not going from individualism to common interest. It's actually the other way around. It's each for its own right now, as you have recalled. That's the show that we've seen with these elections. It's all about thinking for oneself. And against the backdrop of this political world, we can see that facing the danger of transition, it is difficult to find common interests. It's all about different interests. We have companies that suggest innovation in terms of business models, in terms of governance, that are for the common interest. Because what is at stake is not going from one category of interest to another. It's rather having a combination of diverging, of dissenting interests. And this is why we have a synthesis of private interest, of stakeholders, and general interest. A few examples to make things more concrete. When we choose a model of growth by volume and we'd rather have a model of growth by quality, this is a radical choice. There's a specialist of electric wires that decided to forego having more and more products and more people to have a three-level change, an economic change, by focusing on products and customers that are more profitable, an environmental change by positioning themselves as a leader of energy transition worldwide, and by also renovating its social pact with its employees. The outcome of all this is to have a catalog of products that is divided by four times less clients. However, the economic return has tripled, and there's a decarbonation process and goals that have been met. So when we choose, so it's not going down on growth, it's a different growth, exactly. And another example, when we choose to sell use of products and not the products themselves, then we change the business model. We actually rent instead of selling. The customer pays for a monthly subscription to have access to a range of products. That happened with Decathlon in Belgium for circular economy. The outcome of this is that we have offers that are 3 to 6 times less expensive. We have a carbon footprint that is divided by 15, and we have a full-fledged example of circular economy. I'm interrupting you here because this is very interesting to open up the economy of circularity. We're no longer owners, we're renting out. That creates added value, obviously, and it has a very strong environmental impact, which is beneficial, but we're turning the tables here. We go from one model to another. Yes, because we're contributing to modifying habits, deep habits that are really enshrined in everyone's daily habits. The society model as a whole is changed. And there's a last example that I would like to give you, and Pierre will certainly follow up on this. When we adopt the model of the shareholding foundation, where we have a foundation that is the shareholder of the company, we renovate and we changes the governance model. When you're a shareholder, the foundation has an interest in having profits, because the dividends will finance projects of general interest. This is a model that we see in the Nordic countries, IKEA, Velux, Lego. They all have shareholding foundations to the tune of 25%, for instance. That goes to projects of general interest in Denmark, for instance. So we have a logic of alignment of interests. These are models where we have a convergence between private interest and environmental interest with a collective interest. And to go back to what you've started with, Vincent, at the dawn of a major election, which will open up a field of great uncertainties, and the fact that we are tempted to close the door and be by ourselves, we can see that there's the business world is getting more and more brutal against the backdrop of a more and more difficult world. So I think that corporate leaders have a responsibility. They need to show that at their scale, with their own actions, projects of common interest are still possible. This is a political responsibility of corporations. They need to innovate, to invest and shape new systems of general interest. Thank you. So you are actually inducing everyone to go further for the general interest. Céline Lutner, I would like to know what you have to say about that. You are the general manager of L'Oréal France. It was a forerunner. It's in its own world, and it's also a micro-society. How can you see this micro-society evolve in a landscape that is so unstable, that is so difficult, that is so toxic sometimes as the one that we've known so far? Indeed, as a leader, we had this wake-up call. We know that we have a social responsibility with our co-workers because, as you said, our companies are micro-societies, and we have a responsibility towards the rest of the society, consumers, with the paths that we choose. More than ever, it's important to make it known by everyone. To go back to your question about our co-workers, it is true that we need them to commit. We need to meet their expectations. They're looking for purpose, and we need them to be inclusive. We need to be inclusive in terms of generations, in terms of being for disabled people. Gender-wise, obviously, L'Oréal is doing a lot of work on that in a very tangible way. Gender parity was the first company acknowledged in France and the 9th worldwide on gender parity. As for disabled people, 6% of our co-workers have done their declaration and they have reported that they had a disability. So what's important for me is to go even more. To go even further. As for generations, a lot is at stake as well, because more than ever, there's a technological pace, and nobody should drop out. Actually, it's also for this that we need to train 80% of our co-workers that are over age of 50. They need to be trained to be in the game. And we're always listening to the new ways of working as to their quality of life, the capacity to set up very straightforward measures. We've decided not to have Monday morning meetings so that the co-workers can have a nice weekend and not to have the stress of Sunday night, and so that in the morning they can prepare their meetings and they can read their emails. So that's something that is quite simple. And as a micro-society, that we are actually designing and shaping a new society within our corporate world. And we need to be impactful on the society in the broadest meaning and via. Well, we know that environmental transition is a key element, and companies are major stakeholders. Maybe we should make it known much more. It's a deep conviction of ours, and one point on which the society calls upon us to do something. What is really important is to make sure that there's a balance between the purchasing power and environmental transition. This goal is really essential. We should maintain the balance, and we've seen it with tangible ways when we do eco-refills, for instance. When we listen to our consumers, it's nearly more important for it to be cost-effective than ecological, and I want it to be both, because we want to avoid having a part of the population that would just tune out of this, because, of course, it's very laudable for long term. As a company, we have to do it, but we can't deprive some of the consumers because for them this issue is too far off. So we need to reconcile objectives that can seem to be contradictory. The ecology on the one hand, the purchasing power on the other, they need to be not pitted against. We also need to make sure that there's inclusion. We've done a partnership with Emmaüs to make sure that we've opened 4 solidarity centers, for instance, with them, to make sure that via gift strategies that are given out to these centers, access to social and aesthetic care. We saw that it was important to give back self-esteem to some people and dignity. And these are some tangible examples of impact of a company on society. We think that is very important. Cécile Ricard? I hear all that you're doing, and we can imagine that it has a lot of, that it weighs in. There's a history, there's a track record on that, which is incredible. Don't you think that it is quite daunting when we see how many difficulties there are for the political world to shape a new society? What about this pressure that could be exerted on companies? And that could be daunting indeed. Can the company meet all these expectations on their shoulders? Isn't it too demanding to ask so much, more than they could provide? Saying, okay, they need to do things that we couldn't do otherwise because the political was creating good, the social partnership were creating bonds, and it's no longer the case. Isn't it too heavy and cumbersome for the company, for the corporate world? I think we have to do it, and we have to make sure that people know what we're doing. We have to be very concrete. We have to remain humble. As for social rights, it's important to make people know the impact of the private sector on employment. L'Oréal, we're hiring 14,000, 15,000 people. But as for direct and indirect jobs, it's actually 94,000 jobs. It's a lot. It's important for people to know that and to be made aware of what is at stake from an economic point of view. It's also a protection with safeguards, and we make sure that we move the lines, and we have to remain ambitious in this context. More than ever, we have to keep safeguarding our values, because this is a mission that we have within the society. We need to be more educational. We need to make people understand what we're doing with the political world, with the general audience, but to be listening also to what it reveals. We have to make sure that segments of the population can have a different understanding of the world and society. Pierre FERRACCI, you know the corporate world, you know. It's also a matter of balance of powers. It's a world where there are conflicts. You've dealt with social dialogues with different stakeholders, trade unions. Unfortunately, François HOMMERIL is not here today. He's sick. But this has agitated the trade union partners, and they've had a different strategy, and a quite brand new strategy. The CGT has called to vote for Front Populaire. CFDT has called to oppose the extreme right, and CGC is faithful to their tradition, and they would rather not intervene in the general debate. So we have a background that is a backdrop of situation which is quite unprecedented. How can the corporate world play a role in this situation, which is quite tense? Well, the matter of general interest, the state should be the safeguard of the general interest. But I've always been convinced that the corporate world should have general interest goals, and we've gone beyond what Mr. Freeman said. The obsession of a company, what is only at stake for a company is to make profit, to satisfy shareholders. We've overcome that. We've passed that. But with the approach of the environmental questions, but also with the social aspect, the corporate world is a forum of different stakeholders. I never thought that shareholders, customers, and co-workers should be in a conflict. They should not be pitted against one another. They should find some kind of cohesion. That's a place where collective negotiation is meaningful. When we have to say out loud the environmental challenges, to see how we can actually address them with the arrival of AI, nobody should be left along the road. We should think that environmental transition creates supplementary, additional inequalities within the society. And there are also economic challenges because it's very costly. And the economy should be successful, should be looking up. Otherwise, we won't generate value and we won't be useful. How can the corporate world be useful to the political world to make sure that the general interests and the society's interests coincide? I see 3 or 4 elements in terms of contradictory challenges. The capacity to generate compromises. It's not a soft consensus. It's taking one step towards the other to find a common playing field. That's important. The corporate world is well positioned to say, well, the political world can't do it anymore, it seems. Well, right now they can't, but the corporate world could. They have the know-how, they have the right processes, and it's a mentality as well, it's a mindset. Well, sometimes they're drifting away. When you have a power that is too vertical, then it's no good. If I should refer to some recent challenges, we would need to understand it. Each company needs to combine this verticality because there is a hierarchy. You need to set a goal, and when there's no consensus, they need also to make a decision. But we need to have a horizontal kind of organizational chart as well. There are countries where social democracy weighs more than here in France. The people is always right, ultimately. Well, actually, they settle. They are the ones deciding. We've seen it throughout history. But social democracy weighs in much more than here. So the political world should think about it. What is the scope and the remit of social partners in the professional world? There's there's a long way to go for this. There's a lot of corporate leaders that respect social partners and trade union organizations and paritarianism. Social dialogue is important. They know that sometimes we need to be smart. It's not easy. Each one has to make a step in the direction of the other. And sometimes we have to overcome hurdles along the way. Some companies can show the way. There's a third element. That means sharing value. I think that what is most important, we have to fight against poverty and inequalities, and this is what we should be doing. We need to be at the service of the planet, because reducing inequalities with a planet that would be unhealthy, it would be nonsensical. But the most important battle within society, within the political society, is sharing value. It's done in the corporate world, obviously. States do play a role in redistribution, but value sharing amongst for profit, this is something that is quite fundamental. And to go back to what Sophie said, there are transformations regarding shareholding interests that are very important. It's not only sharing it within the company, but also with those that are outside the company, and that would be in difficulty, that were underserved by national education, by lifelong learning, and I think that Alpha Group is earmarking a large portion of its turnover to a foundation and working on inequalities on the field of education, especially for the young ones, because this is where then we have disabilities that are difficult to cast aside. The corporate world has a role to play. I had some doubts, as Jean-Monique Genard was talking about it earlier. He knows it, about the raison d'être of a company. I understand that concept, but by definition, a company should affirm its DNA, its identity. That's a permanent objective. I thought that the raison d'être was not useful, but actually it is. Because throughout the life of the existence of a company, it helps to know what its DNA is, what its position and standing in the world is. And that's the same for the political world. And I'm fed up to see this matter of identity to be overused and exclusively used by those that call us to a vote. It's something deep. It's something radical. It's something that forces us to find a solution. And as for identity, it's immigration, it's how we look at inequalities. The corporate world needs to play a role on that. It's a way in which we have to install democracy within the corporate world. So the identity of a company is tantamount to helping and serving general interest, irrespective of the customers, the shareholders, and the co-workers. But for this, we shouldn't deny that sometimes interests could be antagonistic, and we need to strike the right balance between the dissenting interests so as to have growth in a smart way in compliance with the protection of the environment. But it will be costly, so we need to generate value, and we need to have a powerful economy to do so. That would carry also that value not only for the shareholders, the customers, and the co-workers. And I will wrap up on this. The difficulty to find the right articulation of these environmental, economic, and social challenges is also that there's a lot of decisions. Europe decides one thing, the nation-state decides another thing. Sometimes they interfere too much in the corporate world, for the better or worse. I'm not one of those that would think that the decrees have disrupted the social environment and improved the negotiations within the corporate world, because we need to have a balanced discussion. For this, we need to be on a level playing field, but there are decisions that are very difficult, and that makes things difficult.
Europe can be binding in terms of the environment. I think the same should apply to social issues. I think that Europe should be confident enough that the economy can be paired off with social questions. So we've got the social, economic, and environmental economies, which are all tied together. And sometimes we focus on one rather than two of the others, or two rather than the third. And so businesses are slightly unbalanced in terms of the balance of powers that you're talking about. I think that the social issue has to be the key to everything. The economy and protecting the planet must make people live better here on Earth and at home and in their workplaces. Because François HOMMERIL isn't here, I'm not going to take the role of the unionist. However, let me come back on the third point, which pertains to the players involved in social dialogue in the company. The unions are also involved. Earlier we talked about different forces pulling at society, the anger that's there. And they are part and parcel of society. What we see here in this rather idealistic landscape of constructing a compromise, do we have social partners who are ready to accept that? Or are they not moving to opposite sides and becoming more radical? Whilst participating in the political debate, we saw that the CGT has put forward candidates for this legislative election, and this too is something quite new. So, are our social partners ready to protect the general good? Well, one could ask the same question for the bosses. I believe that when we're talking about different parties voting, it's all very different, because history and the relationship with them and the workers and the unions are very, very different. If you take a look carefully at all of the unions, they have values that should transpire in the polling booth sooner or later. But there are some that are directing their members to vote for one party or against another party, and some are not giving any instructions at all. And the landscape is a bit more homogeneous than it has been in the past. I'm rather disturbed by this this form of protestation. I think that all union movements are conscious at the end of the day that you have to negotiate and admit and accept trade-offs. I think things haven't really changed with the decrees. The CGT signed about 80% of their agreements, and the other unions are at different levels. So there are some unions which will sign more, some less. And I think that compromise is natural for unions. And then there are good compromises and those that aren't so good. And it depends on the balance of power in the company. It depends on the company managers as well. When you take a look at the unions, you got to also take a look at the bosses. There are some who enjoy and are for negotiations. Others prefer a vertical chain of command. And I think that we all know that if we don't respect the unions today, we'll have people out on the streets for better and for worse. And I respect what the yellow vests were saying. And I think we have to find the correct relationship between company heads and unions. And you have to make sure that the workers are on board. We've got Stéphane DEDEYAN with us, chairman of the board of the Banque Postale. And Stéphane, you too think that we need to find the right way to involve workers to constructing the business to the general good. Yeah, may I start by talking about something which may shock quite a few people. For me, there is no general good without individualism. Well, that's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? Explain yourself. Well, if a business is not concerned with its own economic advantages, then it will not be profitable and it will not survive and it will not be able to carry out a mission and complete that mission within the given time frame. That's the first thing. So at the end of the day, would mean that a business coming face to face with general good takes place in what it does, its business, and in a performance equation that has to be profitable and useful. And if we want to work on these challenges, you have to work differently depending on whether you're looking outside, i.e. towards your clients, or inside towards your colleagues. If you start by, well, the fact they're two sides of the same coin. Let's talk about the first side, the inward gaze. So here we are in a society which is increasingly individualistic. It started after the Middle Ages. It speeded up after the French Revolution. And clearly it is an undercurrent trend. And so the business leaders have to harness that individualism to get economic power. And what I'm trying to say here is that you cannot construct anything without talent. And these talents, these skills, have to be orchestrated and organized so that they produce something which is bigger than themselves. And so that's the role of leadership. We're at the very heart of the job of any boss who's here in X. I'm convinced that the best way of running a company is to involve the individuals in the strategy, because that is the best way of making sure that they believe in the strategy, that they're committed to the strategy, because we are harnessing their desire to commit. And this requires managerial skills. It's not only, of course, there's a question of how you organize and manage, but it's a question of managerial posturing as also. If you constantly try to lower the decision-taking level closer to the field, if you do all of this and constantly encourage your employees to support the initiatives taken by their colleagues, then you will start to create things which are very possible. And we at the Banque Postale, we have defined our strategic perspectives to meet our objectives, and this involved 200 people working on the project. At CMP Insurance, we have a program to take the decision-making point of gravity further down the chain, as close to the field as possible. And this is an international company we're talking about, with 6,000 employees. So it is indeed possible to do it. Now, if I take a look at the outward gaze, well, the first thing we need is to have quality of the services and the goods that we propose at the fair price. If we haven't managed that, then our voice will not be heard anywhere. What I'm saying here is that the client is also individualistic. So I am convinced that the best advantage is a shared advantage, because all stakeholders in the business, the clients, the suppliers, society and NGOs, etc., if they feel that the company has individualized the creation of value to the point of only benefiting itself, well, then the business will become an asset which has no value and nobody wants it. and it will be pushed aside. Let's never forget that the value of something is always what other people think it is worth. So, to wrap up, I started by trying to provoke everyone by saying that without individualism there is no general good. The priority really remains to satisfy the general good. And it's not a matter of switching from individualism to the general good, but to free up the general good. So, and that begs the question of the legitimacy of leadership. For me, it cannot be founded simply on authority. It cannot be embodied by an ability to suggest a group project or individual interests that lead to inventing new ways of doing things, an ability to take initiatives, expanding to the level of the company. So every day I try to favour the medium and long terms, whereas everything's pressing us to favour the short term. I want to have decisions taken as close to the field as possible. I want to encourage managers to support initiatives rather than quash them. And it's important that we all have double sharing profit, but also sharing management, and applying these points are the best way to guarantee that we are satisfying the general good. And I think that this is the way that businesses can rise to that challenge, because people are no longer feeling that they are being listened to. They are taken for granted. Even if it's harder, more demanding, we can be a beacon. We can be a point of stability for people. We can create new levers for individuals to manage their environment better. And I think that would be a really good start. Well, public, private, there, I think we are talking about an awareness now, and we want to change the paradigm and commit to different ways of managing businesses and engaging in dialogue. It's all very interesting. So, Maya Noël, you're Managing Director of France Digital. This is a collection of young businesses with a lot of startups and entrepreneurs, and you have a different mindset perhaps in your group. So here, is there more individualism in entrepreneurship? Is there a different way of broaching these subjects when you're talking about digital entrepreneurs and these younger entrepreneurs? Are they more committed to a transformation? Are they interested in transforming society? Given all that has been said hitherto, is the world that you represent any different? Well, I represent young businesses. We've got 20,000 startups in France, and most of them are about 5 years old. So we're at the beginning of the adventure. And so it's one of the drivers in our activities for over 3 years now. What with BPI, we have been mapping out businesses which make an impact. What do we mean by that? Well, it's a business that, through its business model, has a direct impact linked to the SDGs. Nourishing the planet, teaching, and all the rest. And so we have a lot of startups that have been developed and which are going to change business models for the common good. Let me take the example of many businesses who work in healthcare. And they combat medical deserts thanks to apps which will be able to monitor patients remotely. There's Open Classroom, for example. During COVID, it enabled school children to continue learning. So this is part and parcel now of new vocations. And there's a landscape of 20,000 startups. We've got 1,000 in our group, and these are the units which are developing most quickly, encouraged by investment funds, which are focusing on environmental and social impacts. So it is a positive period of time now. These businesses are working for the general good, but it's also essential that they do so. I think it's essential in terms of competition. When you're talking about innovation, we are facing huge, giant players from the States, for example, and we don't necessarily have the same resources, particularly financial resources. So what do we do to attract talent when you don't have the huge budget of an American giant? Well, we focus on the mission and the philosophy of the business. We create a feeling of belonging to the business. We cultivate values that are that speak to the employees, because we don't have enough money to attract them and rely on money. So it really is a driver of competition. And startups are unique in they focus on employee shareholders. That really is important in development strategies. So there are all of these needs. We have to do this because that's the way we fend off our competition. And there are also regulatory necessities. Startups aren't directly concerned by CSRD, but by joining bigger groups with investors that have their own rules and regulations. They are often imposed to follow those rules, and that can be very, very difficult. And they crumble under the weight of all of these standards that they have to respect. It's very counterproductive. But this is, if they arrive to surf on this wave, we have some businesses that can comply by design to all of these new rules and regulations for the general good, the good of society, the good of environment and the planet. And this is a wonderful opportunity. And the final point that I would like to bring up is that we were founded in 2012. And our team value was to play as a team. We are an enterprise, an investment fund. We work collectively. And we really do need to play as a team, because a startup is always a tiny player that wants to break the status quo, and they can't ever do it on their own. So we, in our community of startups, we find ourselves with businesses which are rivals. They're business rivals, but we work together in order to take the industries forward, so that we can transform collective usages, because on the scale of a single enterprise you can't do it, but together we can. As a team, we can do it. French startups can work together. And it's important to note that in order to grow, they need clients, obviously. They need to open up to new markets. They need to integrate bigger groups. So we need to work all together on the French economy, but the right scale is the European scale. And this is an important message today. It's important to work as a team and to open up to foreign investors and foreign talents, because innovation cannot be created in a bubble. It has to be created openly in order to be efficient. It has to be universal. And to that end, it needs to be very inclusive. I'm not saying that all startups are virtuous models. No. There's a lot of gender equality, for example, but there are those companies that do innovate have included social diversity from the very outset, and it's all very cosmopolitan. Thank you very much, Maya, for having addressed this aspect. We've got a few minutes left. We can take 3 questions, if you like. I can see 2 hands that have already been raised. Kindly say who you are, and be very succinct in your question. Does anyone have a microphone there? Oh, yes, someone's got the microphone there. Okay. There we go. The gentleman has a microphone, so off he goes. Thank you very much for the presentations. I am president of the Young Chamber of Economy here in Aix. I would like to broach a question which has not yet been addressed. Today, we have employees who want to commit to their region. And the role of a business in the general good includes their employees contributing to society. So the question is as follows. What are you putting in place to help your employees contributing to the region? Yeah, there's a second hand as well there on the 5th row, if I'm not mistaken. So the first question was the territories. Perhaps Stéphane, that might be for you. And then there's a second question now. Hello, I work for Ecosphere, and I think the model for a commercial business in the social economy is something which you have created in terms of governance and sharing the value that you've created, but it goes even further than that, because a social enterprise has to dedicate over 50% of its profit to society rather than handing it out as dividends. So I've got a question. We have not yet mentioned duty. We've mentioned general good, but not the unbalance that exists between duty and rights. Given there's so much mistrust in society today, these duties are very informal, and they haven't been written down in black and white or chiseled in stone. Is there another hand being raised there with a question? Yes, there's a gentleman at the back who has a question. Let's see who you are, and let's hear your question. Hello. A question for Maya. Is open source a suggestion, for example? Is it a good solution for the environment? Does open source create the common good or contribute to the common good? Well, Stéphane, would you like to start? Well, there's a very easy solution in terms of citizen commitment to their territories. We encourage our employees to take working days to go out and work for associations for different causes. They take it on their working time. It's part of agreement which we have signed, and we're very proud of that. Another thing, rights and duties. I'm obviously not going to talk about politics right here, but what can we do within the company? I believe that in a company, whether you like it or not, there is a social contract, and it's implicit or it's explicit. And the company commits and the employees commit to contribute to a shared project. I like this contract to be clarified, i.e., what autonomy am I given in my work? How can I be a player in the strategy of the business? Secondly, what's my career path going to look like? And third, what kind of recognition will I get? I think you have to be very, very clear on all three of those avenues, because that is the company's duty. Pierre FERRACCI, I'd like to talk about this solidarity question. It's very, very important. Yes, of course, there are some questions being raised about sharing dividends, but it doesn't necessarily satisfy the notion of more commercial experience, a question of governance, shared more. I know certain aspects of this question. I'll come back to what Stéphane was saying. Today, there's a huge need for recognizing the employees. I think governance has to change. Even in the social economy, and governance is two things. There's a debate in the field with the employees taken into account by the management, and individualization, although it may be synonymous with more autonomy, which can be a good thing, but there are many limits to that. But in the field, you have to listen to what the employees are saying, and you have to foster their initiatives. And moving on to governance, there are 13 countries in Europe out of 27. We could be the 14th, and it would be a majority, where 1/3 of the board members represent the employees or the unions. That's where key decisions are taken. So if we include employees in decision-making, and not only in the works councils, that's where you comment a decision or you might correct it. Well, we would be making a huge step forward on all fronts. I'm not sure that we've got time for any more answers. We'll do what we can quickly, and then we must conclude. Okay, open source, that was one of the questions. Yes, open source is a way of moving forward more quickly. We need to have a society which is more open, so it's great to pool resources, and that will help us to be more efficient and speedier in our innovation. So Nathalie, you've got a couple of minutes if you could wrap up. So we have seen that it is possible to reconcile private interests and the general good. We've seen that businesses can come up with new business models. We've talked about different ways. We talked about more recognition and to satisfying the hopes of the employees, leadership being closer to the ground, and a business needs to compromise, and once that happens, then then the sky's the limit. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you to the audience for being here.